Good evening, everyone. My name is Silky, and I work at the Mississauga Library. It's my privilege to host and moderate this event. Welcome to our program lecture meet, Imagine, Illustrate, Immerse, Innovative Pedagogy to engage and inspire active student learning in political science by Professor Spiridon Kotsovelis from the Department of Political Science. In the era where digital devices proliferate and social media reign supreme for rapid information and communication, educators face deep competition as they seek to keep students engaged in the classroom. In this talk, Professor Kostavilis proposes three innovative pedagogies stemming from his research and teaching practice, drawing, performative reading, and role playing that can help transform the learning process, even of difficult or dry subjects, into enjoyable, engaging, and memorable learning experiences. Thank you to UTM for making this program possible. To start off, I would like to state our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands which constitute the present day City of Mississauga as being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wyandot Nation. We recognize these peoples and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous peoples. As a municipality, the City of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by confronting our past and our present, providing space for Indigenous peoples within their territories to recognize and uphold their treaty rights and to support Indigenous people. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe space for all Indigenous people. Today, we will be streaming the program to our online attendees as well. So for those attending online, you may use the chat feature at the side of the screen to put in any questions and comments. We will repeat those questions during our Q&A portion of the program for our speaker and those in-person attendees. For those attending in person, you won't be visible to any attendees online. Everything above the camera on this side is what we. For in-person questions, bear with us as we repeat your questions for the online attendees. That being said, we will be back for the next lecture meet session on April the 6th, April the 6th, 2026. Join us for Promises and Pitfalls of Using AI for Education by Professor Philip Oropoulos from the Department of Economics. Imagine if we had a world where every student had their own private teacher. Join Professor Oropoulos as he discusses his work exploring ways to facilitate more personalized education. This would allow the students to progress at their own pace, receive immediate feedback, working through math, science, and reading. That teachers could test for understanding and ensure that the student does not move until it is demonstrating mastery at each stage along the way. With such an approach, every student would be able to reach their full potential and thrive at these topics. But it is too expensive to scale. The challenge with educational policy is not that we don't know what to do, but that the cost is too expensive. Tutoring can help. There is a lot of evidence that tutoring is one excellent way to supplement classroom instruction. But tutoring is also expensive and logistically challenging to scale. There may be an important role for technology to play. Already, computer-assisted learning can provide a tutor-test environment in which students sequentially follow videos and exercises towards mastery. Professor Oropoulos will discuss ongoing research and results to demonstration. Now I'll turn it over to Dave from UTM to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. In collaboration with the Mississauga Library System, we thank you for attending tonight's fifth lecture meet talk of the 2025-26 season. My name is James Malinowski, and I'm the Community Engagement Officer in the Experiential Education Unit within the Office of the Vice Principal, Academic and Dean at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Spiridon Kotsovelis from the Department of Political Science, who will be delivering his talk entitled Imagine, illustrate, immerse, innovative pedagogies to engage and inspire active student learning in political science. Surinon Kosovilis is assistant professor teaching stream in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. He obtained his PhD in political science from McGill University, where he was the Neferani Doctoral Fellow and also trained in complex systems at the Santa Fe Institute, New Mexico. His research interests include teaching pedagogies, active learning, and indigenizing the curriculum, international relations, so conflict processes and international law, comparative politics, democratization, and cyberspace politics, as well as complexity and mixed research methods. He has taught at McGill and the University of Toronto, both Scarborough and St. George campuses, and has been an associate graduate faculty member at the Monk School of Global Affairs. He is participating in the Tri-Campus Global Leadership Program, was the inaugural instructor for pilot course class, and has designed and been teaching its introductory course. He has also worked with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, where he is an elected member of the MSF Canada Association. Professor Kosovilis has been awarded numerous teaching grants, including TDI, Global Classroom, TFAL, Flexible Learning Initiative, and TSDT, and has been the recipient of two major university-wide teaching awards, the University of Toronto Faculty of Arts and Science 2018 Superior Teaching Award, and the University of Toronto 2024 Cheryl Rager Early Career Teaching Award. Over to you, Professor Kosovilis.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it all to welcome. And my name is Spiridon Kosovilis. I am assistant professor teaching stream at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And this evening, I'll be speaking to you about Imagine, Illustrate, Immerse, innovative pedagogies to engage and inspire active learning in political science. Before we begin, if you don't mind, I'll also contribute with my own land acknowledgement. I'm a native of Athens, Greece. I'm a naturalized Canadian. And I'm very grateful to be able to live and work on this land. So I wish to acknowledge this land where we meet today. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Mississaugas, of the Credit Nations, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wendat nations. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and also to meet you today on this land where knowledge and wisdom have traditionally been passed down orally by Indigenous people to appropriately speak about learning. Also, I would like to express my thanks to James Malinowski, Community Engagement Officer, Adriano Pasquale, Acting Associate Director, Student Learning and Professional Development, and Phoebe Kang, Acting Manager, Experiential Education at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, Office of the Vice Principal, Academic and Dean for their kind invitation, as well as to Elizabeth Cayone, Program Coordinator, Adults and Older Adults at the Mississauga Library for seamless coordination and the warm hospitality, and to Elfie Mahendran and Dilki Rupa for all the technical matters of this presentation. So, at the time when digital devices proliferate, social media reigns supreme for rapid information and communication, and the era of artificial intelligence looms, and the cognitive inequality that it can bring along with it, educators face deep competition as they seek to keep students actively engaged. The presence and use of alluring digital platforms, distracting media, and powerful technologies in the classroom compound the already existing challenges that educators often face to effectively communicate topics that may be unexciting or stressful. But as the old adage goes, necessity is the mother of invention. or according to the original by Plato, our need will be the real creator. Hence, in this talk, I propose three innovative pedagogies stemming from my research and teaching practice at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, created specifically to address such challenges through active learning. Active learning is defined as any institutional method that engages students in the learning process. In short, active learning requires students to do meaningful learning activities and think about what they're doing. So these three pedagogies consist of simulation, of drawing, and reading in a performative fashion, and invite students to imagine, illustrate, and immerse themselves into material, books, and readings, and the knowledge they contain. In doing so, students can become more active and thinking participants and transform the learning process of difficult or dry subjects in political science into engaging, enjoyable, and memorable educational experience. So let us begin with Imagine as a way to augment learning in an undergraduate class of research methods in political science. For many political science undergraduates, method courses are considered dry, boring, and stressful. But that doesn't need to be the case. It doesn't have to be this way, as was demonstrated by the introduction of an entertaining assignment in such a class of mine during the 2023-2024 and 2024-2025 academic years. This was a collaborative effort actually between me and Ms. Megan Vallant, UTM campus librarian, to design an exercise to introduce students to the digital dimension of the method of archival research. Definition of it being the locating, evaluating, and systematic interpretation and analysis of sources found in archives. So the project's objectives, and when I say project, I mean the pilot, the original one, which was for the 2023-2024 academic year with 43 students, were the following. First, to help students learn about and conduct digital archival research. Then to render this learning experience more fun, with the task chosen being superficially unrelated to political science, and you'll see what I mean by that, yet still connected to political science themes like the Cold War, and also include the Canadian dimension. The foundation, therefore, for the assignment was the notorious Falcon Lake incident. This was an alleged UFO sighting incident documented in the summer of 1969 during the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, the two superpowers during the Cold War, based on an individual's assertion that they encountered alien vessels near a lake in Manitoba. So what the idea was to invite class members to imagine themselves as rookie investigators and re-examine the Falcon Lake cold case. So students had to do that through exploring digitized archival records, including documents, reports, news items, photos, and drawings that had become available by the Library and Archives Canada. And as you see, we were able to even do like the badge for students to have, so they were real investigators with credentials. So this pedagogical innovation was introduced in 4 steps. First, a curated digital archive for the class. Second, the introduction of a related assignment. That was a questionnaire that students had to answer. Third, the instruction on archival research to help them how to proceed. Then, fourth, a non-mandatory library visit. And finally, the assignment's completion. So let's start with the curated digital archive for the class. So as I mentioned, digital documents on the Falcon Lake incident that have become available and accessible by Library and Archives Canada were selected and grouped together in a curated digital small archive of 30 items. This had a total of 130 pages, 13 images, and 117 text. These, plus the index, were uploaded to the Canvas webpage of the course prior to the start of the course and became accessible to the students. Here you see screenshots of the curated archive, a sample of the archival material. This was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police message, and also the index so students could see where each item was located. So then the main assignment was introduced. It consisted of a questionnaire with 7 questions that aim to introduce the main contours of archival research, plus a bonus one, requiring a maximum of 750 words that was worth 10% of the course's final grade at the end of the term. It was introduced in class and also posted on the Canvas website of the course. Students had to review all items in the case file, the curated digital archive, that is, in order to be able to answer the questions in the questionnaire. So what happened then was instruction on the topic. We had an hour of class devoted to introducing archival research as a research method. And then in addition, a special 50-minute talk was given by a guest librarian during that week's tutorial sessions. This talk demonstrated an example of digital archival investigation to illustrate main concepts, strategies, and approaches for effective research and show students how it is done. Then followed a non-mandatory library visit. The answers to the 7 questions could be found in the curated digital archive. So anybody at their own leisure, at their own time, they could connect to the course website and be able to peruse the archive and be able to look at the documents to find answers. However, for the bonus, students were also invited to visit the UTM library for a 50-minute presentation of its own archives in a reading room that displays artifacts and exhibits from the collections of the UTM library. There, library archivists also explain how in-person archival research takes place in addition to digital, and handed them a document with a clue for the bonus questions. The visits in group also aim to foster class community spirit and get the students to interact and speak about the material as rookie investigators. And also for the repetition of this in the following year to make sure that we foster inclusivity, because we had some visually impaired students. We made sure that we created badges in Braille so that everybody feels welcome and they have their own readable sign that they are the appropriate, rookies, investigators going on their library visit. Then finally, you had the assignment completion. Following the library visit, students had an additional week to complete and submit their assignment. The class average for the assignment was high, A minus, and this was a quite good average if you ask me. But also to assess this assignment's impact more systematically, a non-mandatory survey was administered at the end of the course. It consisted of 9 questions asking students to self-assess their knowledge of the topic in different stages of the assignment. So here are the results. If you can see, there are 3 sets of bars. To the left is how students reported their knowledge, what level of knowledge students reported they had of the material prior to the course. So we see that it's very low to non-existent. In the middle, we see that the self-reported knowledge increases. This is after class and the extra talk. So students begin to pick up and get a good sense of what archival research is all about. And then after the assignment, you see that we have now moved much closer to above average or very high levels of self-reported knowledge when it comes to the to knowing about archival research. So to recap, the results of this survey indicated that knowledge about the material was minimal prior to the course. After related class and special tutorial, it improved, and upon completion of the assignment and the library visit, it was much, much higher. So, the following academic year, we were told that, or I was told that this research methods class is becoming mandatory. Everybody has to take it. So it was from 43 students, it increased to 195 students. So basically the idea was, okay, we can still do this assignment. So it was scaled up and again was offered to the class with the same parameters. And we also did a survey at the end of the assignment. And guess what? The survey reconfirmed the learning value of this assignment. So here are the examples from the class self-reporting knowledge about archival research for the 2024-2025 academic year. Again, prior to the course, you see that most students have very little or very low knowledge about archival research. After the class and visit, that improves. And after the assignment, it's really, you see that it becomes even more high and augmented. And that means that most students, after all of this, were able to have very high or above average knowledge of that research method. So overall, this pedagogical project demonstrated the following. First of all, complementarity to conventional methods, conventional ways of teaching methods. The conventional ways can be dry. So the idea is that if you pair it with something a little bit more exciting, even if it's about cold UFO cases, that can help boost knowledge about research methods. Also, the project demonstrated active learning mode and also how it supported equity and inclusion in the classroom. It also showcased multiple skills development tech because students had to navigate the curated digital archive to be able to find the information. Critical because they had to analyze all of what they're saying in order to answer the questionnaire, and interpersonal. They socialized during their visits to the library and they spoke about the case. Also, that illustrated, I think it's important point also to note, a synergy between different university units and the combination of their resources. For example, libraries, and of course we're speaking in one today, have tremendous range of resources that can be very helpful, and they can be paired with universities and academic institutions and other types of institutions of learning to be able to augment and promote knowledge in general. For example, the UTM library was able to showcase a lot of, or a sample rather, of a lot of the items and collections that it had, and students were very much impressed, and some reported that they would like to go back. So when students say that I'd like to go back to the library, that's always the good news. Finally, or rather, there was also important but more technical, the demonstration that we can create a curated digital archive that can be customized to different assignments. So for example, we did it for the Falcon Lake incident. There are other cases or issues, other classes where one can use this for illustrative and learning purposes. For example, we are looking into, for future iterations of this, to look at archives, Canadian archives made available about the 1956 Suez crisis and the Canadian involvement. And that can be used, let's say, for classes in international relations and elsewhere. Finally, this project also showed that the transformation of a learning task, the fun activity, can be successful and can actually help students learn even dry topics. So imagining oneself as part of an investigation with an archival research component makes the subject more appealing. So let us now continue with Illustrate. As a device to introduce a complex material in an undergraduate class of international law. So teaching international law, especially introductory, requires demonstration by using many empirical cases. And in my year-long course, I use over 120, 60 per semester. So like each year, students in my 2024-2025 international law class were shown how to analyze cases and what to take from them. They were also offered study tips like how to use cue cards to record important facts. Yet, reviewing the class's midterm test results, I saw that students could not easily remember basic details of a lot of the cases that we had examined. So this innovative project was an experiment and a tool introduced by me to address the challenge of how both to use numerous cases, be able to use a lot of cases, and to help students absorb them better. This project's objectives were the following. First, to present through drawing international legal cases in a pictorial mode as a short graphic novel with a visual narrative. Then, to investigate the learning impact of visual representation mode, this experiment that I mentioned. Then, to point the use of visual tools and illustrations towards more efficient intake of new information. And finally, again, to engage students and help trigger more active learning. So as a background, just to give you an idea, there's scientific research that suggests that the complementary use of visual representations can enhance meaningful learning. It can do so by providing and building connections for the active processing and mental representation of information between what is postulated as two separate cognitive systems that we humans use for processing verbal and pictorial material, what is called the dual channel assumption or dual channel hypothesis. Furthermore, moving to the science of teaching and learning practices have long been incorporating what is called multimodal pedagogy. Multimodality basically refers to ways in which educators can design learning experiences using a range of multimodal resources. And these type of resources include not only text, graphs, and charts, but also visualizations, photos, music, video, and interactive content. While this is not new, of course, multimodality has recently garnered more attention due to the widespread use of digital technology and related change in social behavior. So if you look at the literature, there are many visual representations in political science. You have graphic novels that have often addressed effectively topics in history and political science. For example, you can see here from left to right, there's a graphic novel about the Holocaust, about the Yugoslav Civil War, about the Spanish Civil War, and also a special Le Monde Diplomatique issue that was published to present current news in a cartoon-like format a couple of years back. So there are a lot of visual representations in political science. There are fewer, but still, there are representations on the subject of law that has also been illustrated. For example, here again from left to right, you see a 19th century Dutch American publication about American law. And then in the middle, you have French publications in the 20th century on the Code Civil and Code Penal, and more recent 21st century publication on the Illustrated Guide to Criminal Law. But lo and behold, or perhaps surprise, surprise, there are no visual representations in international law. So as I looked at that, also I recognize that there's a gap that also could be addressed by introducing this pedagogical exercise in my class. So this innovation was introduced in 3 steps. The first one was an in-class experiment. The second was a mini questionnaire to test the knowledge absorbed by different modes, and I'll illustrate what I mean by that. and then the application of visual representation mode to students' own work. So let's start with the in-class experiment. This took place in January 2025. The topic of the class was the use of force, and we had 36 students in the class. So what I did is I randomly divided the class into two halves, Group A and Group B, to illustrate an empirical case. It's a famous case, the Corfu Channel case from 1949, in different modes. So first, Group B was asked to leave the classroom for 3 minutes. And this was just before the class break. So those who didn't want to participate could just start their break earlier. Then Group A was presented with a case in the conventional way that we usually do in university. That is, speak to a text on a lecture slide. So they were presented that for 3 minutes, approximately how much it takes to discuss this in class in general. So here is the slide that they saw. Then Group A was asked to leave. And then Group B was invited to enter the class and to sit for a pictorial representation of the same case for 3 minutes. That is, I spoke for 3 minutes to 10 cartoon frames I drew to visually illustrate the Corfu Channel incident on lecture slides. So here is what Group B was presented versus with respect to the Corfu Channel case. Here are frames 1 to 3. Here are frames 4 to 6. And here are frames 7 to 10. And if you think I went too fast, very briefly, let me also illustrate a little bit about this case. And this case is at the beginning of the onset of the Cold War, and speaks about how British naval warships veered off into Albanian territorial waters and fell and hit basically naval mines that caused casualties. So the British then decided to clear the mines themselves, and they used force to be able to clear them. And as a result, both sides complained, and they took this to the United Nations Security Council, which basically itself referred the case to the International Court of Justice, which found that both sides were at fault, but reserved the most scathing criticism for the British, because they said that they used force in violation of the territorial waters of their sovereign states, and quote, the court cannot accept these lines of defense. The policy of force cannot find a place in international law. So both were at fault, but the British more so. And that's a classic example of when use of force is legal or not. So that takes us to the mini questionnaire on the Corfu Channel case that was distributed to the whole class at the end of the same class. In other words, I showed this to the two halves of the class just before the break of the first hour, and then allowed the break and then 45 minutes of lecture and discussion on other things so that they are able to, like absorb the knowledge. And towards the end of that class, 5 to 10 minutes before closing time, I distributed this anonymous, non-mandatory mini questionnaire. Students were free to complete it or to leave a little bit earlier at the end of the class. So the questionnaire included 10 questions that were specific about knowledge, asking specific things about what students saw or heard and just heard about the Corfu Channel case. And there was also a general question about what they think about the instructional mode. So I basically processed the responses, and the findings from the responses confirmed that the graphic representation group actually fared better. For example, in terms of the percentage of correct answers for those with text representation case, it was 37% compared to 64% for those with the graphic illustration. Conversely, if you look at half of the percentage of incorrect answers, the text representation group, let's call it that, answered 32% of the time incorrectly, compared to only 18% for the group of the graphic illustration. And also, if we want to add the do not remember percentage to that of incorrect answers, the totals missing the correct answer for those who received the conventional case presentation became a staggering 61%. So you hear something, chances are that if you only see it as a text and before you have a chance to study it yourself, there's a good chance that you won't remember much about it. And that was more than double compared to the totals, which was 29% for those who also saw the graphic illustration and me speaking to the visual representation of the case. The final step of this project was a related student assignment. As the findings of this experiment suggested or reconfirmed, if you wish, that visual representation helps learning, then towards the end of the course, for their own research papers, students were invited themselves to illustrate their own work. That is, to add a pictorial dimension to their own research paper. Towards that, an optional mini assignment of 1 point bonus was offered, asking them to represent their final essay's thesis and made arguments in graphic form using 10 frames. In terms of applicability, I told students you don't have to be a Picasso, but you don't need to have high artistic skills. Here is an example of much more rudimentary representation of the Corfu case. That should be fine. You don't need to have high artistic skills. Instead, what is important, what we're looking for, is for you to illustrate arguments and visualize your own ideas. In other words, think of a different mode of exploring a topic and working on it, a different perspective and different dimension to be able to help someone learn better and more about this topic. So about 20% of the class took up this offer and their academic results were stronger. So overall, what we can say is that encouraging students to think and visually represent their written work, which builds on the first two stages of this innovation, and basically sought to further augment the learning process. This also helped them become also more creative and imaginative. And let me illustrate by permission, by permission to show you a student's feedback comments and also their own bonus submission. Here to the right, you see the 10 frames that one student submitted. This illustrates their own evolving argument on the Philippines war of drug case and the potential involvement of the International Criminal Court. That was before Duterte was arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court. But still, it's a very interesting way of seeing how the student thinks and unfolds their argument in their paper. And that's corroborated by their feedback. And I quote, "The visual aspect of the assignment was a huge help in figuring out the things I wanted to talk about in my paper. Whenever I would get stuck with figuring out what I wanted to talk about in the paper, I would think about the flow of what the comics would look like. I also had the idea of using it as a prequel to the paper, and the last panel of the comic was asking about the ICC's jurisdiction, and the paper intended to answer it." So there's even a segue, if you wish, between the visual representation, like a cliffhanger, and read the paper if you want to find out, which is great because it helps engage students again with the material. Overall, then, this project highlighted the following: the boosting effect that we saw steps 1 and 2 of learning when it comes to visual representation. There was a notable increase in correctly recalling information seen for the first time based on material graphic representation and presentation, I'm sorry. The enhancement also of student creativity and performance, that was step 3, was also showcased. It was gauged by comparing participant to no-participant final grades and also by receiving feedback individually by students. Also, the project demonstrated the richness of the multimodal teaching approach through adding a graphic presentation component to text-based ones. And also it highlighted the importance of providing opportunities for students to be able to build connections between textual and pictorial processing of information. Finally, more broadly, one would say, what was highlighted was the benefit of the use of illustration that involves an active process and representation of class material and student work in fun ways. Let us finally conclude with Immerse as an effort to animate an undergraduate online class on the causes, characteristics, and consequences of war and to address sensitive topics. Despite its usefulness, and we've seen it even the technology now through those of us who are watching us through the webinar, remote technology that facilitated remote synchronous, that is in real-time teaching, especially during the COVID pandemic, included a lot of challenges for students, like participation, interest, and engagement, and that was made even worse when the topics were sensitive. However, I posit that these challenges can be addressed, and the virtual mode of teaching could be turned into an advantage, as was demonstrated by the introduction of an assignment with a performative reading component in the 2021-22 academic year. This was a collaborative effort between me and Dr. Martin Reverman, a University of Toronto Mississauga theater and classics expert, as part of an assignment in my class to help students learn about the consequences of war. It invited themselves to immerse themselves into an ancient Greek tragedy via a virtual performative reading event. The project's objectives were the following. First, to invigorate a remotely taught year-long class, especially during the pandemic. Second, to explore difficult topics, such as the impact of war, via other dimensions, including the performative reading and experiential learning. Then, to engage, moreover, to engage students and provide community fostering opportunities, especially at such a difficult time. And finally, to create a memorable learning experience, make something positive out of all of this. So just to give you a little bit of a background, role play, quote, is a pedagogical method that enables students to engage in active learning through taking on new roles, and that's experience, act, and reflect from new perspectives, end quote. In addition, the use of tragedy towards role playing can be very important. Quote, tragedy provides commentary, perspective, and coping mechanisms of various sorts for human audiences. So during a difficult academic year with a pandemic in full swing, a virtual performative reading of a tragedy to promote understanding, learning, and empathy was an ideal middle between simple reading of passages and in-person play acting. So this pedagogical innovation was introduced in 3 steps. First, the introduction of a written assignment. Then the main part, the collaborative dimension, student group formation and preparation to participate in a special class performative reading event. And finally, completion of a written assignment by incorporating the performative reading experience into the student's own work. So let's start with the assignment introduction. In the fall term, I mentioned this is a year-long course, students were invited to begin research on a short paper, about 8 pages, worth 15% of the final grade, on a conflict selected by them from a long list that was provided by the course to explore one of its causes, one of its characteristics, and at least one of its consequences. Let's move now to the main feature of this project, the collaborative dimension towards the performative reading. Starting during the winter break and early winter term, students prepared in teams towards conducting the performative reading of an ancient Greek tragedy as part of a special virtual class event that also included a related roundtable discussion and a Q&A period. The tragedy that was to be read in a performative fashion was Euripides' Trojan Women, or the Women of Troy. This is a quintessential anti-war play on the aftermath of the sack of Troy, the end of the Trojan War, focusing on the fate of its citizens, especially women and children, who lost their city and were either slaughtered or sold to slavery. This is, as you can imagine, a very popular tragedy that keeps re-emerging every time that humanity faces a war. And there have been multiple translations over time. Among them, we have the Trojans. That was a striking 2019 adaptation of the original that interjected the recent Syrian civil war into the plot. It was staged in Edinburgh and Glasgow to great acclaim by theatre director Vicky Beasley, and with Syrian refugees to Scotland as the amateur authors. So as it provided an important additional layer and greater context, and it would allow us to learn more about the civil war in Syria, it was this 2019 version of the text that was selected for the performative reading. It contains 4 original and 3 adapted passages. In addition, the digital proximity afforded by the remote communication platform allowed for reaching out to director Beasley and one of the main participants, Ms. Sana Al-Frouk, a clinical psychologist and Syrian refugee herself, to Scotland, who had helped adapt the ancient tragedy for the 2019 staging, and invite them to participate in the class project via Zoom. So let's speak about the process of this innovative project. In the fall term, the text to be used was posted on the course's website, Canvas, together with supportive material and resources. Students then submitted their preferences for what passage they wanted to basically be set to what passage they wanted to select and read, and they were allocated into 7 groups accordingly. And then they self-organized. They divided their roles among themselves, and they began to discuss and rehearse them. What better, if you ask educators, than students take initiative by themselves to learn? Interestingly, I should note that one could forego reading themselves. It wasn't mandatory for students to participate actively to read in this performative reading event, but they still had, so it was up to them. But they had to work collaboratively to prepare their team for the presentation of their selected excerpt. In early winter term, I hosted 3 remote coaching sessions, 2 hours each, with Ms. Beasley and Ms. Alfrouk. They zoomed in from the UK. But what was crucial is that they also spoke about the Syrian civil war and its impact on civilians. And this helped provide a very valuable learning experience, an experiential dimension to the learning of our students. Ms. Beasley discussed staging the play with Syrian refugees, and Ms. Alfrouk recounted her harrowing experiences fleeing the conflict. These were recorded and posted together with notes by Mrs. Beasley during the rehearsal for the class to watch as they prepare. For example, not everybody made it to the rehearsal. They were working, they couldn't, so the recordings made available. So those who didn't get to the rehearsal could still watch it and learn from it, and also prepare. In addition, the 7 student groups also met virtually and rehearsed on their own. We had an average of 3 meetings per group, often expanding their discussion to class material. Some reported that these meetings also helped them cope with the pandemic, which was an added great bonus of all of this. Then we reached the performative reading event itself. The special event, it was well attended virtually by students and the wider UTM community, took place during scheduled virtual class time in mid-February. It included first a brief introduction by me, contextualizing the play through brief introductions to the Syrian conflict and also the Trojan War. And then we had the performative reading event itself. The participating students read their parts for approximately 1 hour in performative fashion. They all seemed very much invested in their roles. Many adopted theatrical tones. I still remember one starting their lines with, "I am Poseidon." Very impressive. And some even chose relevant virtual backgrounds when reading their own parts. In short, students immerse themselves into the play. After this hour of performative reading, we had a virtual roundtable discussion with Mitch Bisley and Mitch Alfrook, again zooming in from the UK, and Professor Reverman and myself, respectively, on the play as a coping mechanism for refugees, on the psychology of trauma, on Greek tragedy and the enduring importance of drama as an imaginative love, and on the similarities and differences between ancient and modern war. Finally, the special event concluded with a virtual Q&A session with the student audience. The whole event was also recorded and posted on the course's website for students to watch again. The final step of this project was, of course, the assignment completion. Following the performative reading events, students were asked to connect the experience from encountering the ancient tragedy and the Syrian conflict that was interjected into the text and incorporate it into the consequences part of the short paper of theirs that explored the modern conflict. The essay was due in March, and that provided adequate time, including the winter reading break, for reflection and completion of the assignment. The impact of the assignment or the whole project was assessed by how well students related what they learned from this project to their paper, by formal course evaluations, and from a non-mandatory open question survey. The paper's grade average was an A-, higher than every other class assignment. The formal evaluation's composite score was for the course, was 4.7 out of 5, which is unusually high for this class size, compared to the department's 4.1 and the division's also 4.1. And notably, the category, quote, "the instructor created an atmosphere conducive to my learning," and quote, the score was 4.9 out of 5. Finally, the student survey feedback was extremely positive. Quote, "a priceless learning opportunity," said one student. Quote, "something I will never forget," reported another. So overall, this project showcased the following: experiential and mutual learning by providing novel methods, sources, and spaces of exploring and understanding difficult material. Student engagement by animating a heavy-themed remote course, inducing student collaboration, and also building community during difficult times like the pandemic. Further, skill development by introducing and or sharpening interpersonal, technical, presentation, even dramatic skills. A lot of the students could have a good career in drama school. Also synergy. This kind of project showcase the fostering of partnerships between disciplines and colleagues. And it's important that disciplines speak to each other to be able to provide a more holistic learning experience for our students. Finally, the idea, what was showcased here was the idea that teaching innovations can have a positive impact by creating a memorable educational experience, immersing students into the material. So, in conclusion, If you look at the teaching and learning literature, aspects like embedding innovations, collaborative work, fun workshops, experiential learning, and engagement are considered critical for enhancing student attention, participation, and eventually learning. The three examples I presented to you today, students imagining that they are rookie investigators and doing digital archival research for UFOs, or students using illustrations to think through their papers, or students immersing themselves in a classical tragedy to be able to understand and feel the impact of war. All of these three examples, rather, these three examples include all of these elements: innovations, collaborative work, experiential learning, student engagement. And they point that such pedagogies can be applied to improve, invigorate, and inspire active student learning. And in addition, that they can do so in an entertaining and enjoyable way. In closing, since this is not since it's a broader than academic audience, I would like to make three short points. First, naturally, the processes associated with imagining, illustrating, and immersing oneself towards learning are not limited to a university career or a college setting. Did I mention how happy I am that we are all meeting at a library setting today? A great place of learning for all of us. So learning is a life learning process. I don't need to tell you that. And at any stage of our lives, anywhere we find ourselves, we can always employ our imagination, use illustration, or immerse ourselves into a source of knowledge to obtain information, insight, and even wisdom. Second, these processes also engage us more. They transform us further into active learners and make us dynamic partakers, participants in this knowledge. More broadly, one could say that they are among the threads that connect us to one of humanity's great quests, that of self-realization through enlightenment. And third and final, the abilities to imagine, to illustrate, and to immerse oneself, to seek new knowledge creatively and inspiringly are critical parts of our authenticity. This authenticity will be particularly relevant in the age of artificial intelligence, where such capacities and their outputs will not only prevent our skills from becoming obsolete, but will also continue to contribute to the meaning of our existence and to distinguish us as humans. Thank you.
We'll open up the floor to questions. First of all, that was incredible. Thank you. I'm a political science student myself, and I want to be a teacher, so that was just really great. My biggest question, I guess, is for the examples you put, students seem to be like cooperative for the most part, but like, how would you navigate students that are more familiar with traditional learning opportunity or approaches, or they don't really see themselves as creative, so they're reluctant, especially if you have collaboration as a learning goal? I know the first two is kind of easy to work and opt out into the assignment, but how would you do that for like Immerse and things like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the question was, how would you account for students who are more traditional learners and they may not be willing to, or it's not in their mode of learning to try these multimodal approaches, if I understood your question correctly, especially the immersing part. Well, as you see, I think I tried to illustrate a lot of this, a lot of these assignments were either they were they were optional. You had like a bonus assignment that was a very small 1 point, or all these assignments were 15%. They weren't worth too much of the grade. But the issue of the grade is not the matter here. What's the matter is that students could opt out, and there was a lot of flexibility tried to be built into the system to allow differential modes of learning. So, for example, you could still learn an international law case by looking at the text and being spoken to a text. And not everybody might, appreciate or want, let's say, the cartoons, but that was also available. The idea was to expand that space so that you can capture even more students and provide stimuli for learning. So a lot of it was optional, and I think what you mentioned in the third, in the library visit was optional, and it was attached to a bonus point. So if you didn't feel like that was your forte, you could stick with the assignment and just didn't include the bonus one. The same thing with the illustration. In terms of the immersive approach, as I mentioned, students didn't have to participate in the performative reading event themselves, but they had to join their groups and participate in the discussion and preparation, the rehearsal, contribute as they saw fit. The idea again was like, this was similar to a tutorial. In a tutorial, you do have student participation, so they weren't asked to do more, but if they wanted, there was the opportunity to take that extra step and be able to try something else. So the idea was to expand the space, the learning space, and provide different modes. And everybody could basically join at their own pace. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. By the way, I take a small pause here to also recognize Professor Martin Reverman at the back of the room, who with whom we collaborated on the immersive performative reading project. Yes, Sarah, I think you had a question.
Yeah, yes, please. My name is Mike Chobosky.
You have a microphone there.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike Chobosky, and I'm interested in a political science course. And I'm wondering, as part of the course, how do you, we all know politics is politics, and how do you get around your biases when you are taking that course and avoid the problems and things like that? And then finally, how do you get into the course altogether?
Yes, so the question was if one wants to be in a course of political science, how can they, I don't know if you speak about instructors or students, how they can navigate their own biases and how do they get into the course altogether. I'm not sure the second part I understood what you mean by that.
Register for the course.
Register for the course. Well, let me start with the second one. Register, that's the purview of the registrar's office, and one has to go to the registrar office at the university or at the college and see if they are eligible. Sometimes there are courses for non-program students. Sometimes there may be courses that can be audited. Not an expert on that, but any university or college's registrar's office is able to provide information about how can one attend, audit, or actively register and participate in political science courses. In terms of the bias, what I can say is I think it's important for instructors to try to present as as a broad range of perspectives as possible. And always try to think, put themselves in someone else's shoes and say, if I hear this, how does this present in someone else's eyes and someone else's ears? So the idea is to always make sure that one presents to, or if they are the instructor, or if they are the students, the class members, if they are open themselves to a widest possible range of perspectives. And these perspectives in an ideal condition, they will basically then go through the test of reason. And that's a good way for us to get rid of biases. If we test them, let's say, in a scientific way, and be able to explore different perspectives or alternative, let's say, hypotheses, and then put them all to the test, and then see which one comes up in a scientific way as the correct response. And as if one, I think, goes to a place of learning, be it or a space of learning, be it a university classroom or a library reading space, or even a book or a website, let's say, it's important to, I would say, try to go with an open mind. Of course, we all have our own perspectives, but it's important also to have an open mind and try to see things from other perspectives and try to see how others are approaching things, to present a variety of understandings, and also then allow the students, and also through discussion and through looking at material that has been tested, to see which perspectives are the ones that withstand the scientific testing and are most appropriate for adopting. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, I'm coming from general education field and wondering if this actually teaching and learning strategies are limited to political science field or are expandable. And the other question is, are they approved by the curriculum department in UTM or
Are they, I'm sorry, are they,
if they are approved, they are teaching and learning
are they approved?
approved? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. So let's start again with the second one. The question was, so the first question was, again, if you remind me, oh, if this is only limited to political science,
Yeah.
and second of all, if this type of techniques are approved. Let's start with the second one. Obviously, one can imagine, as an instructor, one has some discretion to try to think of new pedagogies. Sometimes, like there is illumination that comes out of nowhere. Most often, it comes from reading materials, being current with the science at the School of Teaching and Learning. And even when one has an idea, let's say, there is always going to be something, or there's going to be something close enough that can help provide a guidance as to how to proceed. Like, for example, in the illustration part, there was nothing on international law, but there were things in political science and there were things in law. So I was able to take some cues from there about how to proceed. And that leads me to the second question, which is, is this only confined to political science? No, actually, a lot of the illustration is done in the medical profession, nursing. They use visualizations. Medical illustration is itself, I think, a program that one can study. And this is not only confined to political science. You look at other disciplines about how they approach things, and then you try to adapt, incorporate, borrow things, propose new things, and that's how you have wonderful synergies. For example, as the one we had with the Department of Classics and Drama at UTM for the Immerse project. So no, it's not confined, and thankfully, to political science, but this is a type of research that is actually advancing. It's relatively current, and every kind of idea that one has, they try to put it to the test. You saw some examples, some experiments in the statistical analysis that I showed you here. And then you follow the same path, the classic path of, let's say, presenting in conferences, getting feedback, looking to publish them, and that's the way in which knowledge advances. If something, the greater academic community finds that it's useful, then it can go further. If not, it's back to the drawing table. Does that answer the question? Thank you.
So that would be the last question for today. We have come to the end of our program. I would like to thank UCM for this opportunity, as well as Professor Katsavelis for his wonderful lecture today. Please.